Once upon a time, there were two little girls named Deb. One little girl grew up to be a preacher while the other grew up to be a pagan, and they both grew up to be the very best of friends. Join the preacher and the pagan as they take a fresh look at Christianity, from the inside out and the outside in.
Hi, thank you for joining the Preacher and the Pagan. I'm Deb Bodwin.
And I'm Deb Suttard.
Hey, Deb.
Hi.
Oh my gosh.
Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark.
What do we do with that?
You know what? I have to tell you, I am so excited about this episode. I actually did real research. I
Did.
I found links. I read actual semi-scholarly articles, if the national science education thing, I don't know. It was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm worried because I'm going to have to actually sound like I know what I'm talking about. And that is very,
you know what?
very intimidating.
I've read so many articles and no one knows what they're talking about with Noah's Ark, so don't worry about it. The pressure's off.
Okay, so Noah's Ark, cats and dogs living in sin on a boat in the middle of the ocean.
But the only thing it really explains is the duck-billed platypus. Really, when you break down to it.
Oh my God.
This is one of those things where it's in the category that I refer to as Judeo-Christian myth. And this assumption that so many people have that we've either got to completely scientifically prove it or completely scientifically disprove it totally takes away from the fun of the story. So I don't know what you do with it, that kind of thing.
Well, honestly, so basically the bottom line is God gets ticked, send a flood, Noah builds a boat, all the animals party for 2 years on a boat on the top of a mountain, and then everybody's happy. Basically, pretty much. Yeah. Okay. So I'm always going to come at this from a geological, archeological. I love that stuff.
Go for it.
And the cool thing is, basically every culture has a flood myth.
It does. And if you look, you can actually go on Wikipedia and put in deluge myth or flood myth. And one of the things I find is really quite fascinating, it's all over the world, but it's cultures that have relationships with water. You do not get a flood narrative from a landlocked culture.
Well, why would you?
Right? But it's such a fear. It's a universal experience. Mm-hmm. And I think that is perhaps the coolest thing about the entire flood narrative, is that it's not a one culture kind of thing.
Yes. Personally, I grew up in Louisiana, which is right in the middle of the Mississippi. It's a giant geological bowl. Mm-hmm. And I grew up with nightmares of floods. The story of Noah's Ark terrified me. Terrified me as a child, because all you have to do is look at Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, these last few hurricanes that have really inundated the Gulf Coast, and you understand how a Stone Age or a Bronze Age, sorry, my ages are all messed up. Bronze Age culture would look at a flood like this as the end of the world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Those levees break and then boom, you're gone.
Yeah. No, this is definitely not anything to take lightly as far as a cultural experience. And of course, they don't have the sense of history that we have, or the meteorologist or anybody else telling them how many days until this is over.
But they have oral history.
It was the end of the world. Yeah.
And that oral history gets passed down, and a game of telephone, it's going to get bigger and bigger.
Well, exactly. And we've got experiences with the Nile that overflowed the banks annually. So this was like an experienced, expected thing. But that's not the kind of flooding we're talking about when we look at the flood stories that were just inspired throughout cultures around the world. But this was an unpredicted, terrifying, what the heck is happening kind of life-changing experience. And as just a couple of the articles you found, I mean, there are villages submerged because of a flood activity. There are entire communities wiped out. They are gone because of flood activity. So this is something that was really, really serious.
And that area in the Black Sea, it's basically flat. There's nowhere for that water to go. So if those natural levees for the Tigris and the Euphrates go, you're basically living in an ocean.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. So it's really easy to see where these stories came from and how important it was to be part of the culture, because they always had to be on guard. I remember as a kid growing up, one of my favorite stories was about the little boy in Holland who had to put his finger in the dike.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, these are not just ancient stories. They're stories that keep being repeated over and over again throughout history and across various cultures.
Now, did you see that cool article about Robert Ballard? He's the ocean explorer who actually found the wreck of the Titanic. Yes, and he in the I think 2000, 1999, that time period, he is the one who discovered what they think is evidence for the flood at Noah's time, which would have been at the same time in history as that. They found houses, they found Bronze Age tools and all of that, and it was under the Black Sea. And it just blows my mind. You know, he wasn't saying this was Noah's house, but
and I think we have to be really careful when we're looking at time periods. It's just way too easy to identify that kind of thing with a story we have. That article goes on to say that there's no real reason to think this is a Noah's thing, and I think that's where history and the Bible kind of butt heads. Is that there's a real desire on the parts of a lot of believers to be able to historically prove what is in the Bible. Equally, there's a real desire on the parts of unbelievers to disprove what is in the Bible. And the fault that they both trip over is literal reading of this story.
Are we back to team literal versus team metaphor?
You know, I don't think we can avoid it, because so many squabbles that come up are basically around that whole literal versus metaphor. And the thing with Noah's Ark is, if you really read it literally, you've got a hyper cruel God. You've got a ridiculously huge boat being built in the desert. You've got resources for like where they find them. You've got animals, but only one male and one female of each. No one else snuck along the ark that we're told.
I got one for you. He gets off the boat, and the first thing he does is a sacrifice, right? So which animal did he sacrifice?
Right?
Did he sacrifice a male? Did he sacrifice a female? Is this why we don't have unicorns?
Well, you know, according to the Irish Rovers, the unicorns didn't make it on the boat.
They were too busy.
The sacrifice probably was not a unicorn. We probably can be okay with that. I know. When you bring a logical interpretation and you treat the stuff literally, it falls apart. So you got to go back to the story, the message, what was going on underneath all of this. And Noah's Ark didn't even end at just the rainbow. I mean, it continued on. Noah had a vineyard. He got drunk. He fell down naked.
His kids were jerks.
Yeah.
I didn't remember that from Catholic school, but I was reading that and going, damn, his kids are jerks.
Yep. Yeah, and again, we're back in the same thing with Noah, with Adam and Eve, where okay, suddenly the world is populating, and we have now what, 8 whole people: Noah and his wife, Shem and his wife, Ham and his wife, Japheth and his wife. I mean, at least there's a little more gene pool there, but to populate the entire world, it falls apart when you try to put this in a historic framework.
And
So
I'm sorry,
go
you're
back to the story.
gonna rebuild animal species from one male and one female,
Right? Yeah.
what if they don't like each other?
Well, what if one of them is infertile?
The
What if they're
mind
past their
bubbles.
prime? What if one of the other animals got hungry when your back was turned? I mean, you're talking about predator and prey in the same boat for 40 days?
Oh, but
That's not going to end well. Not to mention the level of poop you'd have to deal with.
but it was a magical hippie boat, and everybody just smoked a reefer, hang out, had fun. The lion laid with the lamb. It was all glorious. No,
Yeah.
gosh, no. So
No.
I think even no, I can't say that even the most literal minded person would believe that this happened, because there is an entire theme park and museum in Kentucky that says this really happened.
Yeah.
This, oh my gosh, I went down that rabbit hole, and I had to claw my way back out of it, because I couldn't. It was
and it's really bothersome on many, many levels. But one of the things that really bothers me is this absolute drive to prove the historic legitimacy of all of these wonderful old stories, that you are losing the magic in them. Mm-hmm. And you are turning them into something that is like a scientific litmus test. How can you have faith in creating God when you are so absolutely obsessed with the minutia that you miss the big picture?
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And
so,
I mean, it's again why I put it in the whole context of Judeo-Christian myth, which again is more Christian than Jewish. But this, if you look at the story of Noah's Ark and just put it through a couple of tests, like what's the story? What are we trying to get out of this story? What new way of looking at things came up? What question are we what questions are being answered by the story? And I don't mean like history questions. I mean, like, why did we have a flood?
Ethical,
why do we have
yes.
a rainbow? Why do animals look like they pair off? Like, there's ways to see these stories as sharing what God's world was like in a culture that was pre-scientific, that was prehistoric, that just they lived on their stories of how God interacted with the world. I mean, because if you're walking down and you see a rainbow, like, what is that color doing in the sky? Well, we have an answer for that. Now, I mean, 21st century, obviously, we have a different answer for it. It involves light reflection and all sorts of scientific reasons, which is not nearly as enjoyable as a good story. But when you are a primitive minded person who wants modern answers, the story is the best you got, and it's exactly. A good one.
It is a good story. I mean, it's got everything. It's got adventure. Yeah. It's got danger. It's got, a contrite God going, oh man, my bad, dudes. I'm not doing this again.
Right?
Sorry about that. Here's a dove. Here's an olive branch. We're good.
Yeah, and these are symbols for universal peace right through time now. Because exactly. God has promised this isn't going to happen again. It's one of the God's first covenants with humanity is I'm not going to wipe you out.
Just give you the keys and let you do it yourself.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, there is that element. But that, all joking aside, that element that God says, I'm not going to do this again is very significant because so much of the detail in the Noah's Ark story as we know it can actually be found in the Babylonian version of this myth, where in that one, the gods decided they were going to wipe out humanity. So the Hebrew response is God saying, no, I'm not going to do that. So it's interesting when you juxtapose the two. And people who would have put this story together, the priestly group that would have put this story together, were in exile in Babylon while they were crafting this and putting this all together. So they would have heard that story and would have heard gods are destroying, and this is no, our God won't. Our God is not going to do that. We have a promise. Every time we see a rainbow, we know that promise that God is not going to destroy us.
And that's fairly revolutionary.
Oh, it's hugely revolutionary.
Yeah. So, and that would be from the Judeo part of the Judeo-Christian. So that's like way Old Testament things happening.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And these would have been oral stories that came along and got mutated as they, just like all legends and stories get. When you encounter another version, you kind of merge together, and then you fix that version up a little bit, and it adapts again next time. So these have been long oral traditions. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So basically, we're looking at a myth that's designed to teach forgiveness. Bad things happen, disasters happen, but there's always a rainbow at the end of it. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And these are actually really good stories to have. And unfortunately, we get so caught up in the ridiculousness of the story. I'm sorry, it's a ridiculous story.
Of course it is.
You know,
a superhero movie that is not ridiculous, but we love them because they're so over the top.
Oh my gosh. Speaking of this, I went and I looked for that movie, 2014, Russell Crowe, Noah. Oh, I heard about it. My goodness. I watched that against my own better judgment. I knew I didn't want to watch it, and I watched it anyway because I was somewhat masochistic. I can't even.
Yeah, I got nothing. I saw it being advertised. I intentionally refused to watch it. All I know is that someone came to me, a neighbor came to me after seeing this movie, and he said, was there really people rowing out to the boat? I think this is the one, rowing out to the boat after Noah took off. And I'm like, yeah, that's not part of the story. But that I don't know anything more about that version.
It was very sci-fi, and it had, you know, the angels, this group of angels called the Watchers, who were trying to help Noah, but God had encased them in stone and mud, and there were these big CGI creatures. It was awesome.
That under the category of literary license, I guess.
Yes, it was artistic license, absolutely. You know, if
sometimes you don't need to improve on the widget. It's pretty good the first time around.
Pretty good, yeah. But, you know, I mean, so this has actually captured the imagination of artists. And I mean, you and I both have two different musical plays that we were involved in. Based on Noah's Ark. My dad played Noah in 2x2 for our Thibodeau Playhouse Community Theater production of 2x2, and you were actually in one of them.
I was Mrs. Shem in a little musical called Captain Noah and the Floating Zoo. And I still remember some of the songs from that. I mean, these capture the imaginations because it's as you say, it's got everything. And if you look at children's toys, especially with any religious influence, the two toys you're going to find are the Nativity and Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark, because you got all those little animals you can play with.
Yeah, they're adorable. I mean, Playmobil has a set. Fisher Price has a set. I've even made a few knitted sets for folks. I mean, it's just it's one of those stories that kids can literally get into, and they don't question whether an elephant and a mouse were on a boat together. Of course they were, and they just keep on going because kids have this wonderful ability that adults have lost. They can live in the story, and they don't have to get caught up in the detail and whether or not this is real or not. They can just be in the enjoyment of it. Humans, especially Westerns, the adults have lost that, the way the kids can just kind of get into it. And again, also something I see that a lot of people who are anti-religious pick on this story to talk about it being part of the whole world. Well, it was the whole world.
It was the whole world to them.
It.
Exactly.
there was no beaver. Can you imagine a beaver on a wooden boat? I mean,
No.
really, that was going
No.
down in day 2. It was not going to last for 40 days. There was no moose. There was no caribou. There was no penguins. Although Noah's Ark sets have penguins, most of them. It was just they're what they knew in their world. Like the entire universe was destroyed in this spirit experience and then built anew with a better promise from God. That's pretty
Exactly.
profound.
That is pretty profound.
Yeah.
I'm doing a pause
Yeah.
for Kat to edit because you just said something that made me think, and I don't remember what it was.
Okay. Fair enough.
Something
I feel like we're running aground here. We're going to have to pick up on something else to dissect, because we've revisited the myth,
the theme and the myth.
Yeah, a couple times over. So let me just jog up here to the. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is the all this research, like when like why is it so important to have these geological surveys, and why are they not followed through, and whatnot.
Okay, so we'll take a moment, and then I'll just go in and I'll ask you. So what is the politics of
start out with something that you notice is that there's just so many expeditions. Like what do you think is going on with that, or something?
Okay, sure. Okay, we're gonna breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So Deb, one of the things I was noticing during my during my research was there's so many expeditions, and I've noticed this that religious archaeology seems to be a huge thing, and it's also going to be kind of politically problematic, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's one of the things that historians run up against all the time, and because when you are doing basic archaeological research, generally speaking, you go into an area where you think something might be, you keep digging and you find stuff, and then you try to piece together what's going on. When you're doing it from a religious starting point, and this is not everybody, but in too many situations, this is true. You start off with the story to prove it. And then when you encounter items that don't fit, then what do you do? So we've, in all the research that you sent me and stuff that I've found, there's people identifying, this was a Noah's Ark, happened in 2000 BCE, and it happened in 700 BCE, and it happened blah, blah, blah. So there's various time periods that people are looking in. And then they're looking in, like, where was Mount Ararat? Was it in Syria? Was it in Saudi Arabia? Was it in closer up to the Black Sea? Was it down closer to Canaan territory? Where was this? So we don't even have a geographical location for that. So expeditions have been all over the place just trying to prove what is Mount Ararat. It might not even have existed. Could have been another one of the names pulled out, or could have been something that is long past history, or with the geographical shift and how mountain ranges come and go, it could be a mountain that is a hill right now, or it could be like really big. We don't know.
Yeah.
One of the, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to say.
Oh no, just one of the other challenges in this is, if you follow the Noah story, what comes right after Noah, when he gets drunk and he's fallen down and he curses one of his children, and that is the child that begets the line of Canaanites who will eventually be conquered by the Israelites in the story. So much of Israeli identity is based on biblical literacy, that when you have an expedition that challenges the assumed historicity of the first 5 books in the Bible, well, I mean, the entirety of the Hebrew scripture, but if you challenge that and can prove, or can at least create enough of a question around whether or not this was legitimate, then we're talking about do the ancient Hebrews have a historical ownership in that land? And the ripple effect into modern politics is a tsunami.
Yes.
And I know that certain governments have clamped down and stopped archaeological digs because they were not finding the evidence that those governments wanted to have to justify their starting place or their legitimacy.
Exactly.
So that's the other addition when you are doing biblical worship, or sorry, biblical archaeology and discovery and history and any of that kind of stuff. You are butting up against people's ideology and I'm loath to use the word faith, because faith should be about being open, and for so many people it's not. And so you get into this almost philosophical battle between
I
following.
think you were right with the word
truth.
ideology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's following the truth to all ends, or following the ideology to all ends, and then which shuts out each other. And there's so much vested in
Right.
in so much of the Old Testament being read as history, that when you challenge that, it shakes the foundations of so many assumptions.
And that's so problematic, both with history, with science, is that if you're so emotionally attached to the outcome, you're no longer doing history, you're no longer doing science, you're doing justification.
Exactly.
I mean, because
and
a
when
scientist will go in there with a theory, with a hypothesis, but a good scientist, when the facts do not match the hypothesis or the theory, they're going to go ahead and adjust it, and they're going to grow from it, because the whole point of it is learning.
Yeah, it is. But it, when it rocks the foundations, I mean, those of us who have an ancient cultural connection to England, you know, if we never prove that Camelot existed, we're okay. But can you imagine connecting to the Holy Land and we prove that King David never existed? I mean, well, everything stops.
And I see that in a lot of pagans too, because there is a certain group of pagans that are very invested in legitimacy. Like, no, this is not a made up religion. This is, you know, we go back thousands and thousands of years. And it's not, I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm not saying that there aren't elements in the pagan faith, the various pagan faiths. A lot of them are very steeped in history. A lot of them are very steeped in cultural foundations that go back a long time. However, a faith is something you reinvent every day. It's something you wake up every morning. So your spirituality, while it may be steeped in history, if it's a living thing, it's going to grow and it's going to change, and it's going to evolve as you evolve and as its followers evolve. And if you lose that idea, if you lose that, then you're a great candidate to becoming victimized by your own dogma.
Yeah, very rigid kind of approach to things. Yeah, and I mean, as I understand it, for most pagan folks, a lot of the documentation that they'd be pulling from is actually Christians observing. So it's not even like it's firsthand internal, this is how we do things. It's an external source giving an opinion about something they might not even understand, that you probably didn't understand, didn't necessarily respect, and trying to put it in a framework that was understandable to them. So you've got that as an additional challenge.
I think we pretty much can assume that this need for historical legitimacy crosses all lines. I mean, I think people in every faith have these people that they can't just accept that some of this might be a metaphor. They have to have proof.
Yeah.
And isn't that kind of the exact opposite of actual faith?
Yeah, I mean, the definition in the dictionary would say absolutely. Yeah. And that's really, really hard because we're asking people to let go of control.
Mm-hmm.
And people are not good about that. And that's really at the crux of trying to find the provable factors in whatever faith tradition you're part of in order to have a sense of control over your faith. You have to have these assurances and these certainties, and it just doesn't work like that.
I'm always thrilled when I get out of bed and the floor's underneath my feet. I'm just like, wow, cool, gravity's still working. I mean, nothing is a given. Nothing is proven.
Yeah.
In fact, the exact everything here is just a figment of our imagination. We are all just a bunch of electrical impulses who decided to be a person today, and if you can wrap your head around that, then yeah, boat with all these animals, yeah, what the heck, why not?
Right, exactly. What was the Star Trek reference? Big bag of mostly water.
Big bag of ugly bag of mostly water.
Mostly water. Yeah. So I mean, we've got to have a little bit of humor approaching
this is our first
stuff.
Star Trek
reference. Our first one, really? Oh,
okay,
wow.
Mark the episode. It was Noah's Ark. Right on. Okay.
You've got to have, it's totally fair. We're both nerds. You've got to be able to approach these stories in whatever faith tradition. I mean, we're focusing on the Christian one right now. We'll get to other faith, get to your tradition too. But we have to approach these stories with a bit of wonder, a bit of childish, childlike.
Not childish, childlike.
Childlike, yes, I caught myself. And don't kill it by trying to justify it or explain it away. And that is a really rough ask for adults who are caught up in a world of the binary of provable, disprovable, faith, false, truth. We can justify this, we can't justify that. We've got to knock ourselves out of that, and that's really, really rough when everything else is kind of telling us this is how we should perceive the world, which is where we get into conversations of whether or not the Bible is true or not. Well, I mean, you might as well ask what color is the sky, because you can't get into anything that solid and standard a response, especially not in a quick soundbite. You've got to really explore what that means. And when we're looking at stories like Noah's Ark, or Adam and Eve the other week, or any of the Tower of Babel, any of these stories that kind of give shape to our questions, we've got to just be in the moment. And I'm sure there's pagan traditions, pagan stories that you can bring up too, that they tell us something about how we're supposed to interact with the world. Mm-hmm. But they're not scientific texts. They're not historic texts. They are not provable. They are not disprovable. They just are.
Yep. And I think one of my biggest things my biggest benefits as a person has always been that I don't need it to be either or. I am very comfortable straddling the and. Because yes, it is metaphor. It is a story. And yes, there may be some historical documentation that, connects to this. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Mm-hmm. It can be deeply rooted in the psychological and cultural history of our planet and still be a metaphor to teach us how to be in this world. It's when you try to make it one or the other, or to fit a square hole, a square peg in a round hole. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do that. You have to lighten up. You have to float on top of it. Find the good from the metaphor. Find the good from the historical. Find the connections between the right brain and the left brain, and let it go. Be a whole person and have a whole faith. Whether your faith is in science, your faith is in history, or your faith is in the Bible, or in the stones, or it's not just one or the other. You have to back up, float a little bit above it, and take in the whole. Otherwise, you're missing the point.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So, question for you: when you've done all this research, you've been really jived about this entire
I've been having so much
conversation.
fun about this one.
What's your takeaway? What's when you read the story of Noah's Ark? What do you take away from it?
My takeaway is, I'm going to put some space here so she can edit out this mess.
Sorry.
It's okay. My
Surprise
take.
question.
It is. It's something I hadn't considered in my research because I was focusing on the history.
Uh-huh.
Honestly, my takeaway is bad things happen. Bad things happen.
Are we recording again, or?
No, we're still recording. We never stop recording.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I interrupted you.
It's okay. My takeaway is that bad things happen. Floods, disasters, all of these horrible things happen. The way we survive them is we work together. We become a family, and Noah's family is a metaphor for that. When Katrina hit Louisiana, I was stuck in Kentucky. I was too broke to go on a free trip down to Louisiana to help out my family. I remember at that time, I was part of the fandom community for science fiction fandom, and they were doing fundraisers. People would write fan fiction and other people would bid on it. I was able to raise money by just doing what I love to do. I wrote a story, but people from all over the world were doing what they could do to help the people who needed to survive this. And that's the metaphor. That's the takeaway, that when the terrible things happen, we come together as a family. We batten down the hatches. I don't care if you're in Canada or Kuwait or cut off Louisiana. I don't care. You come together as a family because we're all part of a human family, and we survive this. We take care of the ones that cannot take care of themselves. We take care of each other. And in the end, we see the rainbow. And that's what I always took out of this. It's just take care of each other.
That's wonderful.
Ooh.
Yep.
I love that. That was fun. Thank you. Now I feel all passionate and emotional and stuff.
But you started off with talking about how you had a personal relationship with flooding. Now I'm up here on the East Coast, the Maritimes. I get the boat thing, but we didn't have flooding the way you've experienced it as a child. So my relationship with the story is quite different.
When I was a kid, our house, we had quite a bit of land, and it was situated between two bayous, which is a slow running stream. And we actually, there was a bridge right by our front, by the road that went in front of our house. And there was an industrial strength water pump there. And I cannot tell you, in my high school years, my adolescent years, how many times it flooded so badly that we had to take a boat, a pirogue, which is a Cajun canoe, it's a flat bottom canoe. But we would have to get into my brother's pirogue and literally float across, 6 acres of water to the road to get to high ground so that we could take my brother's truck and go to the front road and go a mile up to the front road and catch the school bus. We would have to literally get in a boat to get from the front door to the road to go to school. Wow. This is the kind of flooding that we had. And this was not, oh my God, it's been a hurricane. This is, oh my gosh, we've had a rainy August. So when I say that floods are destructive and that they totally turn your world upside down, It's true. And when you grew up in a place that floods frequently, I mean, I told you I'm in the bottom of a flat bowl, geologically speaking, and the Mississippi River just dumps in on us. So the Gulf of Mexico and the Mississippi River are not our friends in Louisiana. And so when you grow up living with that, the idea that the world could drown, yeah, that's a very, very real thing. So it's understandable why this would be such a powerful metaphor for so many people. You know, you've seen the destruction of tidal waves, of tsunamis, of hurricane floods. You've seen that in pictures, but before we had mass media, we had oral history, and this is what passes down. I can only imagine what the oral history from things like Katrina and Hurricane Sandy are going to look like.
Yep.
And artists are already trying to come to grips with those tragedies, because they were tragedies. Yeah. And so was Noah's Ark.
Yep.
That's the other thing that I always thought of as a kid, and I can't even. Everybody focuses on Noah, okay? I always focused on the people who didn't make it onto the boat. I was always thinking, what kind of horrible existence was that these people, just because they didn't pass some test. Now, obviously they were supposed to be really, really wicked, but come on, what's really, really wicked that you would drown somebody for it?
Yeah, that's a bit of a throwaway.
And it gets thrown away all the time. Yeah. I mean, how bad did these people have to be that they deserved to drown?
Yeah.
Because that's a terrible way to die, by the way. It's painful and it's scary and it takes a long time. So I always thought that, you know, no offense, but I thought God was kind of a jerk in this story.
Yeah, just a bit. Yeah, very much. And I mean, it's part of it feeds into the Hebrew culture too, where, I mean, these are not people who knew how to swim. People who went out fishing and whatever else, like they faced death on the regular. Water was not a happy place where they summered, you know, by the lake. It was something far, far more dangerous. Yeah, but again, this is where you have to look at, this is a metaphor. This was not real people that were so bad God was punishing them. These are stories, these are generational stories of people who, for whatever reason, were the victim of this catastrophe, probably a series of catastrophes, actually.
I mean, let's call it.
And they would feel
wrath, yeah.
And they would feel. I mean, in a culture, in a world where everything was God did this. You know, God brought this disease. God did this, which is very typical in the Middle East, in ancient cultures. It's not hard to see that God created this flood. The justification is kind of interesting and a little annoying and disturbing, but this assumption that a bad thing happened, the gods did that too, that's pretty normative.
Yeah, and it's another point for team metaphor, because if you're team literal, how do you explain your God killing everybody because he was in a bad mood and one family gets to live and two of each animals? How many sheep does your family own? What's your herd size? You only get to keep two of those. For the whole world. If you're team literal, then your God's kind of harsh.
Just a bit. Yeah.
You know? And I can see if you're team literal and that's the God you're looking at, why you're going to be scared all the time.
Yes.
But and they tend to forget, you know, he said he's never going to do it again, but you know, he might change his mind. So
and if you have an image of a deity that is that flip-floppy and that nasty, who knows what other stuff you're scared to do or scared to even think, because a very judgmental, omnipotent being could flip out on you at any time.
Exactly. And it's not even cute, because
No.
No. Let me see. Hold on.
No. And it's not the God that Jesus taught us to believe in.
I totally hope that's not the God that Jesus taught you to believe in, because I'm pretty sure that Jesus had a pretty different message, don't you think?
Yeah, very much so. Yep. And there's a functioning theory out there in Bible research land that as people developed their awareness of God, that the terrifying, destructive God got left behind, and a more complex relationship God developed. Now we have to be really, really careful about that we don't fall into supersessionism, which is the assumption that Christianity is the completion of Judaism, because there's a whole lot of political no that we don't want to get into with that at all. It's a horrible concept, but that over time, as biblical narrative progresses, that people start to develop a much more complex understanding of God that will eventually get to this point of conversation that we see Job and God having, or that Moses and God had, or Jesus represents with God, that this sense of the cruel judgmental is left behind in the ancient culture. It's not carried into more whole understandings, more rich and developed understandings of the deity. As I said, it's one of those things where you have to walk very gently, because you do not want to get into a situation where you're insulting historic Hebrew peoples as being less aware and intelligent, because that's a slippery slope. And so you just have to very gently go, and you watch the Bible as it evolves through the Hebrew scripture in how God reacts to people when they don't make the best choices. The destruction is very much in first part of Genesis.
And that, I think, brings us to my final question for you. What is your takeaway from all this? If somebody came up to you at the end of a sermon and said, okay, what this Noah's Ark thing, what do I need to get out of this?
What's the nugget? Yeah.
What's the nugget?
Yeah. I think that ultimately God is a God of compassion and promise to be involved. I don't obviously have the childhood history that you have. Now, when we talk about blizzards, I'll have another conversation. But
I don't think they had blizzards in ancient Judea.
Not so much. Yeah, I think it is that God is still involved with these people. God was not removed. God was with Noah, giving what Noah needed to get to the next place, the next stage, the next whatever, that God was not disappeared, that God was with the people, and in the end made a promise that nothing like this is going to happen again. So there's the takeaway is that God is involved with the solution as much as the crisis.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. We're going to be doing our Christmas show next.
That's going to be fun. My favorite season.
I know it's your favorite season, and you would think that it would be just a jolly, happy time, but it has its own.
It has its issues, yeah.
It has its issues. So when the next time we're going to be putting on our merry little winter garb and getting ready for Christmas, okay?
Sounds fun. Well, you take care.
You too. And I just want to remind you guys, I'm Deb Bodwin, and she is Deb Suttard. We are the Preacher and the Pagan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
You've been listening to The Preacher and the Pagan with Deborah Suttard and Deborah Bodwin. This podcast is a two-lady podcast production in conjunction with the Barefoot Evangelist. Our producer and sound editor is Catherine Gordon. Our theme music was composed by Deborah Bodwin. You can reach us at thepreacherandthepagan@gmail.com or by visiting our website at barefootevangelist.ca/podcast.
That wasn't what I meant to do. No, what did I do? Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
I have
Don't tell me
no
the
idea.
recording didn't happen.
No, the recording happened. I just don't know how to